Welcome back to Thoughtful Thursday, where we answer your questions about this past Sunday's message. And we're in a new location. We figure if we can't travel, we'll travel within our own space. So here we are, getting a little more comfortable. And this past Sunday, you spoke on 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 15 to 22.
Yep.
Can you share? I'm sorry, I keep snapping. I don't know what that's all about. I'm just very
Snappy.
today.
Becky's very snappy today. She
You-
wants it done quick, right now. Snappy.
This probably sounds really loud in that, but anyway.
Probably. Sorry, everybody. Yes, I can share what we talked about on Sunday. Sunday we talked about hope and where our hope comes from. And our hope is found in the resurrection of Christ. That we can still display hope and have hope in times of suffering, and how we can share that hope around.
All right. So our first question is, why is our hope seen so clearly when we suffer? And I think we actually, I can't remember when, but I know that we talked about this a little bit in a previous Thoughtful Thursday. But I know you used the example of a night sky and the dark night, and how the lights shine. So the light of the stars, not the lights, because in Hoboken we don't see the stars, but the light of the stars shines so much brighter against that darkness. And so I think of the reason that our hope is seen so clearly when we suffer is because it's so dark. And right now I think we're all to some extent have suffering. And I think oftentimes people are putting their hope on some future date where everything's going to get better, but yet that's not a guarantee. And I think our hope that we have in Christ, that's a guarantee. That's not a wavering. That's not a this could happen and change your outcome. Like, the outcome remains. And so I think that's why in suffering, like, I think right now I just keep hearing from people, like, almost like my hope is in the summertime, when the weather's going to be better and we can get out and it'll be fine, and that'll feel better. Or my hope is in some kind of I don't know, just a circumstance that could always change. It could always, there's no guarantee in it. So I think when you have something to offer that doesn't change, it shines so much brighter, because all of those things have something about them. All the things that most people are putting their hope in have something about them that can
Falter.
Yeah. If that's a word. Is that a word?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
word. I think our hope is in the end result. Right. Our hope is in the promises of God, that Jesus is returning, and that we will spend eternity with Him in the new heaven and new earth, and in glory forever. And so the moments that we face on earth, while yes, they're hard to go through, going through a global pandemic, going through loss of a job, or diagnosis, or all those things, are hard. They're really, really hard, and we're not diminishing those. But in those, if we look to the future hope that we have, that's unwavering, that's unchanging. And no matter what we go through, and no matter what we may face when this is over in the future, that end result is never changing. And we can place our hope
I think
there.
Another thing that just came to me is just thinking about where the gospel is so quickly spreading are in places where there's such great suffering, in our area, in our thought and context, we don't have the same suffering that other countries have. We just don't. I mean, there's suffering that everyone faces, loss of loved one. There is suffering that is not different, from one another. But then there's suffering that I think of persecution and things like that. And the gospel spreads so quickly, because to see people are wondering, how do you have hope when this is our circumstance? And they can easily share. And I think that's something, wouldn't you say, that's a big difference? Yeah. And I think that's why the gospel is so, in places like the Middle East or China, we don't experience that kind of persecution. And so to look at somebody and be like, why are you okay?
Yeah.
I think then that's why your hope shines so bright, right? Because when you see somebody really facing some really horrible things, I think it definitely it shines bright. Okay, so our next question, and this was one that I actually helped me to understand a little bit better. What does verse 17 from chapter 3 mean when it says, "It is better to suffer for doing good"? And I think Okay, so my example that I thought of this is more suffering for doing good could be maybe losing your job because you wouldn't compromise in that position rather than losing your job because you were lazy. Or for a reason that's not. So if people, I think later on goes into the verse that it's talking about, like, so that people, when they slander you, like what they're slandering you about is like almost absurd. Right. Like that's how I think of it. It's almost absurd. Like they're slandering you for not doing something bad. Right. Like
and I don't know. And I think too, when you suffer for doing something good, it is recognized by people outside of that situation. Right. And I can think of moments in my past. I remember when something happened to me and I had a choice to make. I could either take the high road or a different road. And, I prayed and we prayed, and how did we take the high road? And we took the high road, and I remember
there's suffering in that.
Yeah, and there was suffering in that. There was a lot of suffering in that. And I remember my mentor saying to me, you're taking the high road, and that's going to, you're going to be rewarded for that. And it all ended up turning out okay, but there was a lot of suffering in that, and we had to walk through some really hard stuff. But the people outside of that who saw that was a great witness, not of my perseverance or my abilities, but they saw an amazing witness of what Christ could do in those moments and through that hard time.
Right. Yep. All right. So our next question, how can I be prepared at any time to share the hope I have? I know where my hope comes from, but I'm often not sure how to verbalize it. And I think this is common. I think of this as when people share with you, you tend to want to build that bridge, and like you are with them in their suffering, but it's hard to, you almost feel like you said, you almost feel like you're discounting what they're going through when you jump to like, well, I have hope in this and this, and it almost feels like you're minimizing what that person is going through sometimes. So I think that's sometimes why we struggle to verbalize, because it could feel like that's what we're doing, and that's not what we're doing. You're offering. It's like if you had something so amazing to offer to pull somebody out of where they are, why wouldn't we offer that? But I think sometimes we don't, because it feels like, oh gosh, like I don't want to minimize what they're going through and say like, oh, well, I have the answer to, like I think that's kind of why we might go there.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we can have the tendency of, if you're sitting with somebody who's going through something hard, to join them in their sorrow, right? And almost
not in a healthy way.
Not in a healthy way, and you begin to build on each other with your sorrows, and that's not what we're called to do either. But in those moments, sit in that sorrow with them, yes, in a healthy way. In a healthy way is being a shoulder to cry on, be a ear to listen, be somebody that's going to be present in that moment.
Right.
And then when the time is right, they will ask you, well, what do I do? Or how am I going to move on from this? Or
how do you have hope?
How do you have hope? And what am I? And that's your moment where you can say, well, in those times and in my dark times, I have leaned on and leaned into Jesus and his work on the cross and his resurrection and what he has done in my life. And then you share the moments where Jesus has walked you through your hard times.
Right. I think it even, just to point back to the verse, it says, yet do this with gentleness and respect.
Yes.
Keeping a clear conscience. And so the verse prior to that just says, any time to give a defense to anyone who asks you for your reason for the hope that you have. And it says, do it in gentleness. And I think that's the start of that, to answer that question, is like, you might struggle with that because maybe you're not sure how to be gentle. And I think you just described a great way of, you're not jumping in. You're still, like we always say, like, you want to listen to someone else's story.
Right.
You don't want to just interject and cut them off. And so I think, when you do this in a respectful manner, that's the first step to it. And I think the other thing, verbalizing it, I think, you can almost add too much to it.
Yeah.
And I think there's, our hope is found in the resurrection. And, something I'm someone who loves to learn about religions of, that what are other people being told in their own faith, and so how does ours differ? And I think the hope that we have is clearly seen not from just the teachings of a prophet. That's not where we find our hope in just the teachings, but it's actually in the supernatural. Right. Our hope is in a supernatural resurrection of a God who then it validated his teachings. Right. So I think that's a lot different, because there are other religions. I know I'm a big fan of Tim Keller, and he always mentions these kind of things, like how do other religions offer, what do they offer in suffering? Right. And they do offer things. It's not as if they don't. So right. I don't want to discount that they do. But, he will always point out like the difference. And I think that's the big difference, is this supernatural that validated those teachings. Right. And so when we go to the Bible, these teachings aren't from someone who's perished and did not,
who's still in the ground somewhere.
Right, who's still in the ground somewhere. Like, this is from a risen God. These words have actual power to them because of that. Yes. So that's why our hope is in the resurrection. So, like, the simple answer is, my hope is in the resurrection. But, people might be like, well, what? Like, why? Why is that the place? Right. So I think that could maybe be something that would be helpful too. Yeah. When we're to give when it says, like, to give an account. So I hope that helps. If you have other questions, please feel free to let us know and put it in the comments or DM us. But anyway, we will see you all next week, and we will be talking about something in 1 Peter.
1 Peter 4, 1-6, and embracing who God has called us to be.
All right. So we will see you back next Thursday, and have a great week.